Hey, I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV-MC. Today I'm going to show you how to rebuild your cylinder head for your late model KTM or Husky 450, 500, or 501. There's a few different reasons you might be in here rebuilding your cylinder head. Maybe you did a leak down test and had leakage past the intake or exhaust valves and adjusted the valves and the problem didn't go away. Or maybe you start the bike up and it burns oil for the first couple minutes and kind of goes away. That could be bad valve guide seals, or maybe you had part failure. In any case, we're going to show you how to get those problems taken care of. Now, this cylinder head came off a 2020 Husqvarna FC450, but the process will be similar for any late model KTM or Husky with this slanted valve cover. So that's going to be your 450s, 500s, 501s, and you know, the older style, the valve cover sat a little bit higher, and the newer style sits a little bit lower. Still a similar process, just refer to your model specific service manual for more information and specs. Now, a couple of things on this cylinder head. We cleaned it up, but it's not a bad idea to use some carbon remover or oven cleaner on this combustion chamber to help clean it a little bit further. You'll just let it soak for a little bit and then wipe it off. Don't let it soak too long or it can actually damage the aluminum. And to check to see if your valves are actually seating, and also check the condition of those valve seats, we can pour some solvent down the intake and exhaust ports, and you want to make sure the solvent is above the top of that valve head. And you'll just let this sit in here for a minute and see if you notice any leaks. If you have any, it's going to be pretty obvious and fluid's going to come out there. This one is looking pretty good, so we don't have any leaks there. We'll go ahead and check the intake side. Since we didn't have any solvent leak past these valves, that means the valves and the valve seats are in good condition. We can reinstall this onto our engine. Now, one thing, it's not a bad idea to lube the valve stem, maybe spray just some light penetrating oil in there and get some oil on these bearings before you reassemble everything. Now, a couple things. Even though our cylinder head passed the solvent test, we're still going to disassemble this and show you how to do everything. Now, at this point, we need to take the valves out. Now, to get the valve out, we're going to use the valve spring compressor. These are really inexpensive, and you can see this adapter, it has a round end and a pointed end. The inside of these valves are rounded, so this side will use the rounded end. I'm going to flip this around. And you need to select the correct size adapter. So these adapters have a lip on one end. That's going to sit over that valve spring retainer. So this one's just a little bit bigger, and that's going to work perfect for us. So I'll install that onto the tool. And then all we have to do is tighten down the valve spring compressor, and that's going to expose the keepers. Once you can see the keepers, you want to get your magnetized screwdriver or a magnet and just pull those out. And it's very important when you take this apart, keep everything in order and organized. Then we'll just slowly back off the compressor. And then we have our spring retainer, then the spring, and you'll notice the wider part of the spring is towards the bottom. And then when we remove the valve, I'm going to press this down just a little bit. And if you don't have one of those small hole bore gauges and you want to find out if the valve guide is bad or not, or if you need to have it checked by a machine shop, what you can do is with this valve face out, or the valve head out, You can rock it back and forth. And if you feel a little bit of play, it's all right. But if there's a lot of play in there, you definitely want to inspect that valve guide further and possibly replace it. And the other thing, when you're pulling this valve out, just kind of notice how smooth it glides in that guide. If it winds up at any point, that indicates a bent valve. So I'm going to set that out, and then we're going to go ahead and do these same steps to the other valves, again keeping everything in order. At the very minimum, if all you have is a valve spring compressor, at least you're going to be able to do a visual inspection on all the parts, and that's going to be a good indicator if they're good or bad. Now you might notice that the intake has a lot less play from side to side than the exhaust, and that's because the exhaust, they're going to heat up just a little bit more, and those clearances are going to get tighter as the machine is running. Now I do want to point out, for this very last valve to come out, I had to switch to a smaller adapter, and even though it's not ideal, that's just what you're going to have to do, just because of the shape of this head. Now, one last thing to mention about this rocking motion, if there's a ton of rock in there, that's when you're going to see damage to that valve seat, and sometimes you'll see little chunks or chips actually missing from there. After that, we can go ahead and remove the old valve stem seals. I'm just going to use some needle nose pliers to pull those off. The next thing we want to do is clean up all of the parts using contact cleaner, some rags. We're using a gasket scraper, and I'm also going to use some carbon remover. And for the valves, I'm also using a wire wheel to get those cleaned up. Now that we have everything cleaned up, we want to do a visual inspection. So you want to check these retainers for any cracks, and then these valves. You want to check that face and make sure it's not pitted. The other thing that can happen is it can actually wear down, and if that happens, this margin on the end is going to be really thin, and it might look like that face is cupped out. This one's looking pretty good. Then you just want to check for any wear on the stem. That one's looking good, and then last, make sure the tip is not mushroomed out. So this one passes the visual inspections. The next thing we need to do is measure the valve springs. Now they have to meet a minimum free length. If they're not at that length or above, then they're too weak and they need to be replaced. So the spec on these ones is going to be 40.7 millimeters for the minimum, and we're at 4105, 4106. So that one's looking good. And then you just want to make those same inspections on the rest of the valves. Next, we need to inspect these valve seats, and these are going to be a 3-angle cut typically, and the middle cut is going to be where the valve seats. You want to check that for any pitting or visible damage. The other thing that can happen is these seats can actually chip, and you're probably going to see other engine damage if these are chipped out. Now, to check these, you can use a Sharpie, or you can actually use a dry erase marker. I've found that works a little better. The Sharpie, if you put it on there, you need to do this while the Sharpie is still wet. And this is just going to help us check the contact pattern of the valve face to the valve seat. So if you're only using a Sharpie, you're only going to color that valve seat, but the dry erase marker, you're going to color both the valve face and the valve seat. And ideally, you know, if you're using Prussian blue, you wouldn't rotate the valve at all, and that's going to give you the best contact pattern. But with this, with the dry erase marker, we're going to have to rotate the valve to get that coloring to go away, or to show us the contact pattern. So I'm just going to put a mark right there. We're not going to rotate the valve very far, and that's still going to keep it pretty accurate. We'll just rotate it a few times. And once you've done that, you're going to be able to see exactly where the valve is contacting the valve seat. And you can look at both the valve and that seat, and actually you can measure the width of where it's making contact. And that width should be right at 2 millimeters. If you're not exactly at 2 millimeters, but close, somewhere around there, then you're probably all right. And the main thing you're looking for is a smooth, consistent pattern all the way around. Now, after that, you can use those same steps to inspect the other valves and seats. To get this thing back together, I'm going to start by lubing up my parts. We're going to apply assembly lube to the valve stems. And then for the other parts, I'm just going to use a light lubricating oil. And you can see right here we have our new valve stem seals we're going to lube up. Now we can install the spring seats. And while I'm here, I'm going to drop some assembly lube down each of these valve guides. And to help me do that, I'm just going to set the seal into place, and then I'm going to use a socket that doesn't catch on that spring to press down on it. And now we can start installing our valves. So we'll slide these into place. Then we'll install the spring. Again, this narrower end will be facing up. Spring retainer. Then we're going to compress this and install the keepers. Now again, I'm using the magnetized screwdriver to install the keepers, but if you don't have one of these, you can use a little bit of grease on a regular screwdriver to get them installed. Once you have all the valves installed, you need to make sure the keepers are fully seated. So to do that, we're going to take a plastic mallet and we're just going to use another hammer to hit that. And that's going to open the valve and make sure those keepers are seated all the way down in there. Just make sure, you know, we have our cylinder head supported with a couple of wooden blocks, and we've made sure that the valve that's opening is not going to hit the wood. Now, if you need any parts for your cylinder head, be sure to get those on our website. And once you have this cylinder head put back together, you can go ahead and reinstall it back on your bike, and follow us over to those other engine rebuilding videos for the KTM and Huskies. We can help guide you through that process. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more helpful content. Thanks for watching.